I think people are so worried about holding on to their perspective and holding on to what they believe is right. And that the possibility of listening to someone else somehow is going to take something away from that belief system, the things that they want. And what I would say is my experience of this with many, many, many thousands of people is that your ideas and that your possibilities only get better. And I would say, don't take my word for it. Try it and see what happens and see how letting in another perspective helps you become more you.
Welcome to Season 16 of Purposeful Empathy, a show that is dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who understand that the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. Thanks so much for watching or listening. Enjoy the show. Welcome to a new episode of Purposeful Empathy. Today I am joined by Dr. Natalie Petouhoff, an empathy scientist and business consultant who helps brands reduce cost and increase revenue by transforming the customer and employee experience. She is the best-selling author of Empathy in Action, a book that shows leaders how to blend empathy and experiences in a way that leads to better business outcomes. Now, what's interesting about Natalie is that she holds a PhD in material science and engineering from the University of California. So her expertise as a bona fide rocket science provides her with the left brain skills to critically analyze the world and consider ways to make it better. To that end, most recently, Natalie spent some time with the Dalai Lama's monks while producing a documentary that explores the ripple effects of the ancient wisdom of compassion. And she's now on a mission to bring empathy into every aspect of our lives, including the workplace. Welcome to the show, Natalie.
Thank you.
Wow, I don't know if I've ever had a conversation about empathy with a rocket scientist, but that's a fascinating background. And I can understand how your insights are quite multidisciplinary and layered and, full of complexity theory. So I'm really excited about this conversation. I know I just introduced you, but I want to share something else with listeners and viewers before we get into some questions, because I find this very helpful to provide context to the conversation. So I always ask guests, what do they hope, the takeaways for listeners will be? And you took some time to think about this, and I want to share that you say that when empathy is applied, whether it's in personal or professional relationships, we're all better for it. Okay, so I just love that as a backdrop. And then as a second takeaway, you talk about when empathy is applied to companies, it reduces costs and increases revenue. So we've got some real, some bottom line implications to explore there, which I think is going to be interesting for leaders who are listening. And then you also say that, empathy is something that we can learn and we can become better at. It's the gift that keeps on giving, right? So with all of that as the backdrop, I usually begin conversations, especially with authors, on the backstory. So I would love for you to tell us a little bit about what brought you to this empathy universe in the first place, and then we can dig in further.
So I've been asked that before. What is my origin story? And if I'm truthful, right, because mostly I talk in corporate, but if I'm truthful on a personal level, when I was a little girl, I would lay in bed and I would hear my parents fight. And that's really scary to a little kid because our safety relies on the unity of the family and that togetherness. And so for me, that was really scary. And I thought, if my dad could only hear from my point of view how scary that is, maybe, just maybe, some of that behavior might change. That didn't really happen. That dream didn't get fulfilled. But it did make me think a lot about what if we could do that. And so as I was going to school, as I was, entering the workplace, I saw so many times, whether in personal or professional relationships, where we just really don't see the other person. And so I became really fascinated by human connection. And at the same time, I have degrees in engineering. And I really I think I went in that direction because I wanted to know how the world works, right? And so there's the physics of solid, which is what the metallurgy is all about. But at the end of the day, it's all energy. And so I just became really fascinated with this left brain, right brain approach of how do we become better humans? And how do if each one of us became a better human, how does that make better workplaces? Because we all spend a lot of time there. And then how would that help corporation flourish?
Oh, that's fascinating. And I know that you believe that we can become more empathic. I wonder if at the top end we could talk about like ways to become more empathic. Is there any magic alchemy there to becoming more empathic?
The three steps when I do get to speak to companies and I get to consult and work, one I get asked that a lot, right? And so there's three steps. The first step is listen. And we've all heard about active listening, right? So we kind of know what that is, but we don't do it. We think we're doing it, but we're not. We're so used to multitasking and so used to thinking about, well, that person is saying that, but the point I want to make is, and we start telling ourselves a story and we start formulating the next sentence that we're going to say. And so the first challenge is to actually listen with curiosity. And once you do that, pause, let the person say whatever they want to say. And then instead of speaking about what you want to speak, say, tell me more. That's the magic sentence. So what that does is it does a couple things. One is that person feels witnessed. And in that witnessing, they feel seen and heard and acknowledged, which is a gift. And when you're truly authentically listening like that, they're going to open up and they're going to allow themselves to tell you from their heart, or maybe from their heart and their head, where they're at. And it's only in those moments where people authentically share like that that you uncover what's motivating them, what's important to them. And I find 100% of the time, I learned something that I didn't know that I didn't know. And the third step is now that you know, how do you take that information and how do you integrate it into your choices and decisions and into the conversation? And what I find is when you model that, to tell me more, people start to use it and you see it like growing and growing. And the idea is for all of us to really start speaking like that and really hearing each other.
That's powerful. That is very powerful. Tell me more. I'm going to make a commitment that I will ask that as a follow-up. I will put that into practice at some point during our conversation today. So we both do work with corporates, and I came across a stat through Business Solver. I'm sure you're familiar with the report that talks about how 84% of CEOs understand that empathy is important to their business, but 7 out of 10 fear showing empathy in the workplace because they think they'd be less respected. So I just wonder, why do you suppose leaders have such a hard time taking the perspectives or listening in that way or empathizing with their direct reports?
I think part of it is we're a business-centric world. We're not a customer-centric world. We're not an employee-centric world. We're not a human-centric world. So if you go back, I don't know, first industrial revolution, 100 plus years, depending on what part of the world you start in, bosses needed to know the information. They needed to be right. And so that's how we operated. And oftentimes, what workers wanted or needed or thought wasn't really a priority. And that was the consciousness. That was the way that we did business. Fast forward through time, we get leadership models like command and control, which primarily came from the military. And when you're on the battleground, it's really important to have one leader and one way to do things because otherwise people die. But in corporate America, what I find as I get to implement some of these practices is that not having to have all the answers is a relief. And when I work with leaders who are curious, right? And so being vulnerable, being open are all scary things. But And part of the reason that I looked at the ROI and the left brain stuff is throughout my career, I've been developing things like this. And in order to get them approved, part of what you need is to show that there's a bottom line effect, that there's some, directionally correct way to go with this. So when I tell them, well, what if you could save money? What if you could increase revenue? What if your employees, more of them were not quiet quitting? What if? Right? And they're like, oh, so if I do this, if I try this, then there's a good outcome. And I would say that the ones that are brave and curious and willing to let go of the way that things have always been, um, find it personally and professionally rewarding.
And in addition to what you just named as important bottom line implications, I think there's a big conversation, certainly post-COVID, anyways, around mental health and psychological safety. So I just wonder if we could dig into that a little bit. So, how do you believe that empathy alchemizes our feelings of disconnection or loneliness? And how does it fuel courage, compassion, and connection, our sense of belonging, and the need to feel seen, heard, or acknowledged?
So there's two parts to this. This is kind of the neurobiology piece. So if we agree that we're all human, right? Which right now, right now we are. Um, there's the whole AI conversation, right? But we're all human beings. And the way that we're structured, we have hardwiring and soft wiring. So the hardwiring, well, let's start with the soft wiring. Our soul is designed for connection. As babies, if we're not connected, if we don't connect with our parents, if someone doesn't feed us, change us, we die. Babies don't have a choice. So that starts our software. It starts our neural networks, and we create stories about what we believe about ourselves, about whether we're worthy. So in that connection, we are looking for courage. We're looking for that connection and that sense of belonging. And the sense of belonging at a primordial level when we're babies is I'm safe and I'm going to be okay and you're going to feed me. As we grow up, we don't have that same dependency, but we have the same software. We have the same neural networks operating. And at the same time, we have this thing called the ego, and the ego wants to protect us. So if our needs aren't met, then the ego steps in and it begins to protect us. And the strategies of protection are things like fighting or running away, which is the flight response, fawning, which is pleasing, or freeze, which is like, I'm just not going to do anything. I'm going to fly under the radar. So if we agree that we're all humans and we all operate like this, and you think about each one of us operating like this, so as a CEO, would you rather have all your employees fighting, all your employees running away, which is, I would say that's kind of quiet quitting, everyone trying to please everybody, but nothing getting done, or everybody just not doing much, right? So if we understand, you know, our machinery and the best way to optimize that machinery as humans is to actually connect. And the process of empathy is really alchemizing that need to be seen and heard. It's that process of having someone be able to say, hey, I have this idea and I'm really excited about it. And what about this? And what about that? And in that process of sharing, you have a sense of belonging, you have a sense of feeling like you're heard and seen. And that's where our intrinsic motivation comes from. We can give people money, we can give people job titles, but at the end of the day, what people really want is to be seen and heard. And this stuff, what's fascinating to me is it operates on a very primordial level. And I haven't seen a human that's not designed this way. So if you're a CEO and you're listening and you have a whole bunch of humans in your company, and that's the way we as human machines operate, what made sense to me and part of the reasons I studied this as a leader was to understand how do we optimize human potential.
And if we circle back to the story that you shared at the beginning, of you feeling
fear when you would hear your parents fighting downstairs and how you wish your father had, in particular, had kind of figured that out. Maybe things would be different. I mean, I could relate to that. I grew up with two younger sisters. We'd sit at the top of the stairs. We'd hear my parents downstairs, and we'd have a conversation between us. When are they going to get divorced? And I just still remember the tension just sitting there at the top of the staircase. Um, those kinds of experiences that really do impact our nervous systems, where, a kid needs to live from a place of security, right? That's a core need that we have as children. If that doesn't get met, we find all sorts of ways of dealing with it and compensating one way or the other. And that shows up as adults and as workers, right? So we have a bunch of unhealed people in leadership positions and out in the workplace and in the world more broadly, which is why, the work of Brené Brown and Gabor Mate is so important if we really pay attention to it, that we have, there's a fair bit of healing that we need to do as individuals to be more effective, right? So I just wonder what do you say about all of that without, businesses are running at full speed with big strategies, decisions that they have to make. And the feedback I get often is like, we're a high performance culture. All of what you said sounds great, but it sounds like it's going to slow us down, or we're going to be like doing group therapy, or, do you speak to that?
And I've heard the same thing. So, and I think that that's a common conception, but I think it's a misconception. So, if we don't address those things, so let's say that um, we had a factory, and the factory wasn't really operating in an optimal way, and there was a way to optimize the machines in the factory. As a leader, would you say, well, I think we'll just keep operating at 50% capacity because it would slow us down to actually stop and look at the root causes and fix that. So let's just go on for the next 5 or 10 or 50 years and operate at 50%. Or sometimes my theory is you have to slow down to go fast. And so if we go back to the fact that we are human machines and this is our hardwiring, this is our neurobiology, this is the way we're designed, and this is the way we operate. So, as a machine, if that's how we operate, what I've seen and the results that I got, like working with DoorDash, JP Morgan Chase, Hilton, is that there is resistance in the beginning. There is skepticism because not a lot of people are bridging the gap. So there's the people who talk about the therapy aspect, right? And that we need to heal. And then there are practitioners like you and I who are taking those theories and we're trying to help leaders see a new possibility and a new leadership model. So for the leaders who, and generally what I find is there's kind of like an adoption curve. Like there's the innovators, there's the early adopters, and that 10 or 15% are the ones that can hear this conversation. Then there's the gap, and and some of the people, what they're looking for, the next phase of people, they're looking for facts. They're looking for proof points. And that's why I do the return on investment and the calculations. So I would say that, if you were driving your car on a freeway and you saw that the gas tank was on empty, would you keep driving or would you stop to get gas? And I know that kind of sounds like a ridiculous example, but that's kind of what I think we're running on empty. And I think that we've gotten as far as we can get in running our companies this way. And for those leaders and those companies who really want to be different, and we are running full tilt and things are going faster than they've ever gone, this is a new strategy. And I would say, why not? Why not try it? Right? You don't have to change everybody and everything. The way that I've been the most successful is take a little small pocket of people, of a team, and say, let's try this. Let's get some feedback. Actually, let's be empathy practitioners. Let's do a pilot and then let's ask people, how did this impact your work? How did this impact your attitude? How did this impact your productivity? And look at the business results.
And you have examples of having done that.
I do. So what was interesting was I wrote the book And then I got the opportunity to consult with DoorDash. And so in this particular case, and one of the best places to look is customer service, right? So it's the part of a company that is very external. When it's bad, everybody sees it. It can be brand damaging, can be reputation damaging. And so when I was working with DoorDash, they came to me and they said, the feedback from our customers is that we're kind of robotic and in some cases inhumane. And you can think of DoorDash as food delivery, but they see themselves as a tech company, right? They built an app. So the age of the app. And so as a tech company, they had that mindset of just grow fast and keep going and keep going. But at some point, it was hurting their reputation. Customers were going to competitors. And so it was really important to start to look at maybe we could do something different. So part of what my job was to actually listen to the agents. So I did lots of visits to call centers, did side by sides, listened to what the agents were saying, listened to how the customers responded, watched the whole process. And in that, I saw that, and this is, I'm not pointing to them, I would say 99.999% of most call centers and most companies, and they can't see what they can't see, Anita. They're operating from a business-centric point of view, so that the way that they respond to customers, the way that they teach agents to respond is a very business-centric point of view. And for years, we've done the sympathy statement. Oh, Anita, your order is lost. We're so sorry that happened to you. I bet you must be really frustrated. I would be frustrated too. This is not the type of service that we'd want for you. Right at that point, you're like, that emoji where your hair is on fire and you're like crazy. It's like, you're like, you can't hear me. You're not listening. You're not, right? And so that little tiny voice inside of us that says, I'm not seen, I'm not heard, and I'm not acknowledged explodes on the customer service agent. And then think about that poor customer service agent who's just trying to do their job. That's a very frustrating situation. So I invented this thing called the house is on fire, which is when someone calls and says, hey, you forgot my fries. The question becomes, what are they really saying? And part of what you asked me was, is this like a whole therapy session or we're all going to be like in a room crying and regressing? No, this is what we people like you and me, we make this very, very practical. So what I did was I said, okay, let's listen to the conversation from the business's point of view, which is the whole apology analogy. Someone says, you forgot my fries. We as businesses go, oh, I'm so sorry that happened to you. That must be really frustrating. This is not the kind of service where, we apologize, like all these sentences, right?
We'll
So
give you a
not
credit
only,
for your next order.
well, what the person really wants is they want some resolution, right? So the question is, would you rather be responded to like that? Or if your house is on fire, would you rather hear, I'll get the hose? And so when you can figure out what the I'll get the hose phrases are for your company, and you don't want to acknowledge, you don't want to just jump over that someone's upset, but don't spend so much time and energy on the apology, the sympathy, because that doesn't create connection. It actually makes someone feel like they've done something wrong or that you're apologizing insincerely because the customer service agent, it's not their fault that the restaurant messed up or the company messed up. And in that moment, what that does is it create connection. And in that connection, there's a sense of, oh, you actually care about me. And I have a sense that I'm heard and I'm seen. And it creates a sense of loyalty. And as a company, you want to create a return customer because that's where revenue comes from. It's not just the first purchase, it's the next purchase and the next purchase and the next purchase. And that's why some companies who have brand loyalty are so good at what they do and have the revenue that they have because people come back
Mhm.
because of the sense of identity, because of the sense of belonging. And so what I've tried to do in creating the houses on fire is to be able to say in a very easy and demonstrable way, Here's how we're going to recognize our customers and we're going to actually solve their problem. So when someone calls, we're going to figure out what the house is on fire statements are. And what we found was that oftentimes the agent may not know the answer, but instead of having this auto response, we're actually teaching agents how to solve problems instead of read a script. And so then that's where the change begins. It really starts looking, and customer service is a great place to start, right? Because it's tangible. You can see the results. They measure the heck out of people in call centers and the call center. First contact resolution, customer sat, average handle time, all these things. We reduced the average handle time in half. We increased the customer sat by unbelievable rates. First contact resolution, because you're not angering the customer, they actually believe that what you're saying and you actually solve their problem, they don't call back.
Right. Okay, so I'm imagining this. DoorDash is a great example because, you're not going out to dinner, the food's coming to you. And so I'm thinking of, it's Friday night, I'm a single woman, why am I alone? And why don't I have a date? So I'm ordering something. And if my fries didn't arrive, my comfort food, it is my house burning down because it's a meeting an emotional need, right? And or so many other little examples like that where somebody could say, "Oh my God, it's so first world problem, the fries didn't arrive, who cares?" But it could actually be meaningful. Maybe I'm having a birthday party for my kid who I haven't seen because we, swap between my partners week to week and the fries didn't come So,
Or it could be like you have a birthday party with 25 kids. It could be you're a mom of five or dad of five, and you've ordered dinner and the kids are hungry, right? And so the DoorDash, I mean, it is a first world problem, and the fries are it's supposed to be light, right? And there are lots of call centers that answer health problems, people who have cancer, right? But it's an example of when your customer is calling you,
mm,
what is that house is on fire moment?
mhm,
What is it that they're really looking for? And across the board, they just want you to say, I got the hose. And so the transformation comes, and that's how we take this, like here we're hardwired as humans for connection, but our amygdala is going to react with some sort of fight or flight response, and we don't really want to activate that, right? We don't want to start to have the customer service agent and the customer start arguing because that makes the call go, the escalation tempers, the call goes, average handle time goes up. They get frustrated, they hang up, they call again. So all the statistics that you want to have happen in the call center go haywire. Customer sat goes down. So if we go back to here's how we're designed as humans, a human's interacting with a human, or a human is interacting with a bot. Sometimes we use bots in customer service. The bots have to be set up this way too. They can't have all that like blah, blah, blah programmed into them. They really need to be able to understand the house is on fire and have those types of I'll get the hose responses. So it's true for whether it's technology or whether it's agent or a combination. And when we understand that, now we can start to redesign how we operate. The interesting of things were that the agents told us, oh my God, Nat, we like this so much better. And call center agents, they'll stay in a job for 6 months and they'll jump ship, right? Because they can get a few 50 cents, a dollar more somewhere else. So you have a whole lot of turnover, and that's very, very expensive. It makes the contact center a cost center. So you start to look at this as a microcosm in your business, and you start to see the transformation in a little tiny pocket of success. The agents loved it better, the supervisors loved it better, the managers loved it better, the executives, once they start to see it, then they started modeling it, the tell me more process. So that's how we can start in a little tiny pocket and start to look at, and so when you have a pocket of success, then everybody wants to know, well, what are you doing over there? What's the house is on fire? What is tell me more? Right. And so then now we can start to help people see, well, there's value in hearing other people's perspectives. And then we start to, because I'm an engineer and I've worked in engineering firms and software companies, we look at innovation, we look at motivation, we look at first to market. Like intrinsically, how do you motivate people to really create those scenarios? Well, if we can tap into how humans are designed and how they're truly motivated, now you're looking at engineering, you're looking at finance, you're looking at marketing, you're looking at sales, you're looking at all the departments. And it's not like we're sitting around doing a big kumbaya. I'm not talking about creating kumbaya factories. I'm just talking about innate human motivation.
Yeah. That's a powerful business case for humanizing our communication and just sort of dropping a little more empathy into the mix. I'm all on board. So, at a higher level, be outside the scope of companies and workplaces, what do you think would happen if we all became a little more empathic?
I think it would change the world.
Hmm.
I think that there's a lot of division. I think people are confused. And I think a lot of it is I'm right and you're wrong. And if we could actually see someone else's perspective, what you see is I think of perspective as a rock, right? And a rock with one perspective is one tone. But let's say that you add many facets of perspectives. That's how it becomes a shiny diamond. When people ask me about why does perspective matter, one of the key things is that we miss the canary in the coal mine. So if you ask employees what's going on in the company, they will tell you. They know. And on a day-to-day level, they know what's frustrating. They know what's not working. Not only do you miss the canary in the coal mine moments that are going to actually mean that you're going to drive the plane into the mountainside, but you also don't get those golden nuggets, those opportunities. And I don't know about you, but I've been in many companies where I'm like, oh, I have this idea I'd like to share. And you share it and it gets shot down. Or the boss pretends like it's their idea. So there's these dynamics, these behaviors that don't really forward the cause of the company. And so oftentimes CEOs don't get to see the dynamics that happens on a day-to-day basis. But when you're in a culture where it's really not psychologically safe to raise your hand or to offer a different perspective, there's so much of what doesn't get offered that it really hurts the results of the company. And so having this culture where people are curious, where people are allowed to share, and I've had people say, don't like this is an interesting philosophy, right? Sounds like a philosophy. So what I say is take it and try it. Use the tell me more statement and see what happens in your own personal life. And what I found, at least in my life, is that 100% of the time when I say tell me more, I learn something I didn't know that I didn't know. And that changes the course of my decision-making process. And so take it as, you know, Dr. Nat said something. Anita kind of nodded her head. She's going to try it. I would invite everyone who's listening to try this and then see the results. And if it works on a micro level, you can start to see how if we could all understand a little bit, we might. So there's a difference between alignment and agreement. When I say tell me more, that doesn't mean that I have to completely change everything that I'm thinking. It just means that you're acknowledging that person, you're allowing them to share. They have the opportunity to be able to express their opinion. And let's say that you did that back and forth. That's where it's the gift that keeps on giving because both of you learn and you grow. And in that moment, think about all the ideas and the possibilities. Like I see so many conversations that get stopped because people don't authentically share from that place. But when you see like the magic happen, people go, oh, what about this? And what about this? And what about this? That's when you see the popcorning, the
Mm.
ideas flow, and the possibilities flow. And that's where new inventions, new ideas, and new businesses flourish and grow. That's
It's
the
interesting.
possibility.
What came up to me as a memory as you were describing just what you shared. I lived in Singapore for 2 years doing my master's, and I taught English as a second language or a third language at a business school with the clients were primarily Japanese business people who were working in Singapore. And so they were studying English as another language. And it was interesting in conversations where I'd ask a question for a class conversation, and one person would say something, and then the next person to speak had a different opinion, but wouldn't say, "Oh, I completely disagree." Would always start with, I really agree with what you said." And then the next thing they would say would be in complete disagreement. And over and over this was happening. And I was like, what's going on? So we had a conversation about it. And I think about it sort of now, what happens to our amygdala in America? Let's say America is where everybody's really opinionated, especially now we're in our, social media echo chambers and we're so polarized. So one person says something and the other person, I completely disagree. Now there's no chance for connection because if you've totally disagreed with me and you're, I want to distance myself from you. So it's almost like establishing an opportunity for some common ground where it's like, oh, I see you as a person. You see me as a person. Now let's have a conversation about how we disagree. And I can hear you differently. That's what you're saying, essentially.
Yeah, and I think people are so worried about holding on to their perspective and holding on to what they believe is right, and that the possibility of listening to someone else somehow is going to take something away from that belief system, the things that they want. And what I would say is my experience of this with many, many, many thousands of people is that your ideas and that your possibilities only get better.
Love that. Love that.
And I would say, don't take my word for it,
Mm,
right?
test it.
Try it and see what happens and
Mm,
see how letting in another perspective helps you become more you.
yeah. Like putting some gasoline in the tank when you need it.
Yes, yes.
So, okay, I want to switch gears a little bit. You've just come back from hanging out with some monks working on a documentary film. So, tell me the backstory to that, and then let's chip in onto what came out of that.
So I got the opportunity. We got invited to go and to Dharamshala, India. So I don't know if you know the Dalai Lama's backstory. In 1959, he decided that he needed to leave Tibet, China, and he went to India, and India gave him exile. And in that moment, that must have been a really scary moment, even for the Dalai Lama. And what I found fascinating was his example. So in life, stuff happens. Some of it's good, some of it's not so good. And what his example shows us is that it's not the stuff that happens, it's how we respond. So his response to having to leave his homeland was to recreate Tibet in India. So he recreated the government, the schools, the actual city housing. There's a children's school there, which I'll tell you a little bit about, which is really phenomenal. Places of worship. So all the things that you would need in order to recreate a culture, the music centers, the dance centers. And so there's been a lot of documentaries on the Dalai Lama. And what we wanted to do was something very different. We wanted to look at the ripple effect of teachers who are teaching very ancient wisdom. So the Tibetan Buddhists have been around for over 2,500 years. And so we thought, well, this is interesting, but one of the questions I had for the monks and the nuns and the historians and the teachers was in order for me to integrate this into my life, like I see what you guys did, and this community is amazing, and you make everyone feel welcome, and you are empathy and compassion practitioners. But do I need to become Tibetan in order to do this? And they're like, no, 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 we don't want to convert you. We just want to live in a world where people are compassionate and show empathy for each other. I was like, oh, this makes a whole lot of sense, right? And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to look at the ripple effect of integrating this ancient wisdom into our everyday life. And so we talk to monks and nuns. We actually get to talk to scientists who are looking at like medicine from the Eastern and Western point of view, integrating many perspectives. We get to look at the scientific proof of why um, operating as humans in this compassionate, empathetic way, why that increases their human potential. And so it was a very fascinating journey where my director, Josh Sycama, and I took a very small crew and we did 2 trips and um, almost, we spent over a month there just listening, observing, and interviewing people. We actually also got to interview the monks and the executive director, who's part of the Dalai Lama's AI Center, to look at how they're integrating all this. And so what's fascinating is you see a whole culture where people are truly authentic and listen and honoring. And that changes everything.
Natalie, tell me more.
And there it is. There it is. So what I found was that part of what they do so well is they have a school. And in the school, they have the regular math, they have the science, they have the music and the art, but they actually have a whole curriculum on how to be a good human. And in that, they acknowledge the design of humans, they design what motivates us, they look at what intrinsically taps into the best of us. And part of what they talk about is how do we help you be everything that you can be and to find your purpose and define the things that make you shine, the things that make you get up every day and feel like, wow, it's, I'm so grateful to be alive and I have such an opportunity to contribute. And I think, at least in my travels, what I found is that after the pandemic, the for me, the pandemic created a cause for pause. And in those very quiet moments where a lot of things happened, many people passed, um, many people lost their jobs, many people found that time very frustrating. We started to ask ourselves very deep questions about what we want for life and what we want for work. And then it was over. And we were all kind of thrust back into a world that hadn't really changed, but we're intrinsically changed. And so it's created cognitive dissonance. And so I think that and the phenomenon, the result, the output of that is really looking at things like quiet quitting, where people show up for work, but they don't really try very hard anymore. And it's their way of resisting a system that doesn't see them, doesn't hear them, doesn't truly care about them, especially, you know, everyday workers, right? Hourly workers, um, people who contribute to the healthcare system. That was a really difficult time to be part of healthcare. It still is. And you start to look at, we've created a society where we're not respecting how we're designed as humans. We're trying to fit people into structures and businesses that don't really take that into account. And the result is the system is now broken. So, part of, as sentient seekers, Josh and I, as sentient seekers, we're looking at how do we solve this? Like, if we don't solve this as a human species, we're probably pretty much in trouble. And we can kind of keep trying the command and control and just say, well, you have to go back to the office, you have to work, have to, like all those have to statements, or you should. The truth is that humans need something more than we've ever needed before to flourish. And we're all searching. And we're searching for companies, we're searching for places and organizations to belong to. And so if you're a leader and you're wanting to attract those kind of people, looking at how people are designed, looking at the power, the superpower of empathy as a leader, as a way of being and as a culture, what we hope to gain or what we hope to show with the documentary is here's here's a leader who practices this every single day. He has for the 89 years of his life on this planet, and he's recreated a whole society in modern day life like this. And it's a great example of a leadership model that's truly different, that is a lived example and creates lived experiences that are truly different. And, we talk to businessmen, we talk to restaurant owners, we talk to physical therapists, we talk to doctors, we talk to the head of AI. Like we weren't just with the monks and the nuns, right? We talked to a nun who was a rapper before she became a nun, right? So all these people became part of this movement. And what we're hoping is to show a new type of leadership and a new way of being as humans.
Well, I don't know if you're familiar with them, but it's interesting timing because as I'm listening to you talk about the fact that at schools they're taught all the usual curriculum, but then superimposed on that is something around character and integrity and compassion and community, like all of those skills, what it means to be a good human, as I heard you say. If you are you familiar with the inner development goals framework?
No,
Out
I'd
of
love to hear about
Stockholm.
that.
Okay, so this is a good moment for me to share that with you and share it with the listeners because my next season in 2025 is going to be devoted to it. So I'll put on in the show notes the Inner Development Goals Framework website. It came out of Stockholm a few years ago. They just had their third annual summit. And essentially, the backstory is a group of people in Stockholm were stunned when they realized that the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals were launched in 2015 with a 15-year runway. And with only 6 years to go, we have only achieved 12% of the goals. And they're like, something is up with how we are not achieving targets on whether it's poverty or gender equality or climate change mitigation. What can we do? And so they brought leading thinkers around systemic change, but also human motivation. And it kind of got whittled down to the idea that we as humans need to evolve to be the kind of leaders that the world needs. So similar thread I'm sensing. And so the 23 skills and competencies that are listed in the framework across 5 different domains are basically an agenda for inner transformation that leaders need for outer impact. So I would really invite you to check that out, and anybody who's listening and watching, because I think it's a very, very useful framework to consider for I think the direction we all need as citizens and leaders to go. So, anyways, thanks for letting me share that. I want to ask you 2 more questions. Do you want to say something? I don't want to cut you off if you had something to say to that.
No, no, I would love to explore that. And what came to mind was I would love to work with you.
Hmm.
I don't know what that means, but that was like, wow, I think we'd be like a powerful partnership. I think it would be so much fun.
Hmm.
Yeah. I I don't know.
All
It's
right. All
cool.
right. Offline. You saw it here first, folks. Well, I'm delighted by that invitation. Let's do that, Natalie. Let's explore how we might collaborate. That'd be fun. Um, okay, so I want to ask you penultimate question. How has working on this documentary changed you?
Hmm. It changed me on a cellular level.
Mm.
I think that there was a part of me that was in my head about all these theories about empathy, and I read a book and it was best selling, and there was like the ego stroke, and I'm a human, right? That was all like really cool stuff. Saving DoorDash $100 million from implementing, concepts like the house is on fire. I make it sound really simple. I was there over a year, a lot of retraining and a lot of programs that it took to do that lift. But in a year to save $100 million in a call center is a good accomplishment. I think that little girl's heart was touched because I knew I knew that there was a place on earth where people lived like this, and that there were leaders who got up every day and led their country and their governments and their institutions in a way where people truly felt seen and heard. And so getting to be part of their petri dish, getting to be part of their community, being so welcomed. They were so open, they were so gracious. Um, we're really excited about the possibility of finishing the documentary and actually doing, Dharamshala has a film festival next November. So our goal is to go back there and do a whole celebration to showcase what we call the wisdom whisperers, which are all the people who um, shared with us the effect, the ripple effect of this type of leadership. So for me, on a personal level, I got to experience it in a very visceral way.
Mm.
And I got to see, from every walk of life. I mean, even we interviewed ninth graders, right? These are teenagers. And we asked them, like, truthfully, what do you think about this stuff? And they're like, it's really cool. I'm so lucky.
Mm.
So whether it was youth or people in their 70s and 80s, you can truly see that this is a way for human flourishing in a way that I've never experienced any place on earth. So for me as a practitioner, we just got back a couple weeks ago, so it's pretty fresh. Um, but part of what I want to do as I'm working on book two and book three is and I'm looking to figure out how to teach this stuff. How do I take this and turn it into a curriculum for life? How do I take all my left brain, rocket science, neurobiology, metallurgy, alchemy, all that like engineering stuff, and how do I combine it with what I know about current leadership models and co-create with the Dalai Lama and all of his wisdom whispers a way of being that is going to forward the planet for forever.
Mm. Wow. That's a good purpose, Natalie. And I love that you feel changed on a cellular level. That's a very big statement to make. And I buy it. I buy it. I totally do because, it's one of the things that I find, so Maslow, right? Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I feel like America, and as a consequence, because America is the leader in the free world, it has like an impact on the rest of the world. Since America is so boldly going after the self-actualization of its people, right? That's the promise of America, is that everybody's self-actualized. If we just end there, um, then we end up where we are. Whereas Maslow, just before he died, I learned this while writing my book. I had no idea, but Maslow's like, oh my gosh, towards the end of his life, like that's not it. That's not the end all be all of what it means to be human. And he wrote quite a bit about self-transcendence, the idea of being of service to something greater than ourselves and being of service to one another, and all of those higher order things that any religion on the planet, any spiritual tradition, any ancestral tradition has talked about. It's like we've kind of forgotten. And I think the idea of coming back to it, it's like our soul in the pandemic knew, and it's like the world forgot. So I'd love to have an ongoing conversation with you about how we can collaborate because it sounds like we're on the same wavelength at the moment, which is exciting. So my last question, which I love to ask. I know we're tipping into just over the hour, but if you'll indulge me. All right. Well, we have our last question of our podcast. And for those of you who are watching this show as opposed to listening to it, you'll see that there's been a wardrobe change. And that's because Natalie had a power failure and we weren't able to record the last couple of minutes of our conversation. So we regrouped and very exciting because it's actually coming out this Thursday, the episode. So we're catching this in the nick of time. But you're as beautiful as ever. So lucky for me to have such a gorgeous guest. The question that I love to ask my guests at the end of these interviews is
If you can think of a time in your life when you are on the receiving end of empathy and what that meant for you.
So yes. So I wrote a book. I've been studying this my whole life. And what's fascinating, there's always another layer, right? You think you got it, and think of yourself as like very knowledgeable and learned on the topic, and then you have a visceral experience, and you're like, oh. So let me share the super glue story. So there was a guy, and I had super, super, super crush on this guy, right? And so one night I'm laying in bed and I'm like all, snug, right? Ready to just like doze off. And then I hear my FaceTime go off, and I'm like looking at my phone. I'm like, it's 2:30. Who the heck would be calling this? What? And so it was William. And so I'm like, do I answer? Do I not answer? And I'm like, he would never call this late at night. He needs something, right? He needs some help probably. And I'm thinking, but I have face cream, my hair's up, like I'm not camera ready. Like we're gonna ruin the romance. But then, like, my empathetic self said, okay, just answer it. So I click on it, and his face is all bloody. And I'm like, oh my, what, are you okay? And he's like, well, I was at a concert and someone pushed me down, and obviously I'm bleeding and I need some help. And I'm like, do you want me to drive you to the hospital? He goes, no, no, no. Here's what I need. I need some super glue. Like, how much did you have to drink? And he's like, I'm not drunk. That's not it. I just need some super glue. And I'm like, okay. So he's asking me this, and I'm like going through my drawers, right? And of course, you pull out super glue and it's all dried up. I think that's just like anytime, anywhere someone needs super glue, that tube is going to be not working. So I'm like, okay, I hang up and I go to the drugstore. And I'm standing there in the aisle, and I find myself arguing with myself. And on one hand, because I'm so smart, right? And I know, and I heard, what he said, which is my face is bleeding, I need help. So the logical part of me says, oh, he needs liquid bandage, right? Because that would be appropriate for the face. And then the other part of me is going, no, wait a minute. You're supposed to be an empathy practitioner. He asked for super glue. And I'm like, but that's stupid. That's a really, really dumb idea. And so I'm going back and forth and having this argument, and I'm fascinated that I'm arguing with myself, right? And then I'm like, okay, I'm tired. I'm just going to buy both, go home, drop it off at his door, go to sleep. So the next day, I hear a knock at the door, and I answer, and it's William. And I'm like, whoa. So he's shaved off one of his eyebrows. Like you can see the cut, right? But clearly, whatever happened with the super glue, it was not a good idea. And he says to me, I just came up to thank you. And I said, and there's like the little tiny part of me that's going, like doing the happy dance. You're so right. You're so right. You knew, right? And then he said, I really want to thank you for something that you probably aren't expecting. And I'm like, okay. And he says, I really appreciate, you were right. This super glue was a dumb idea. The liquid bandage would have been a much better choice. My face thanks you for the next time. He just said, but what was really important to me, and the reason I came up, besides just being a good human, is I want you to know how much I appreciated being seen and heard and felt. And that even though you knew the right thing to do, you actually heard me. And that visceral experience of knowing that he felt witnessed, that he felt that someone heard him, even in the ridiculousness of the request, that he truly felt listened to. And something happened to me, right? Because it was a fascinating experience, because my logical, protective, have to have the right solution, leadership, like, and as leaders, we're always looking for that right solution or that right answer. And it's my job often to have the right answer, right? And so that's the part that wanted to answer this. And then there was the part of me that really was touched because often I think, and I think most of us react with that protective amygdala, got to do the right thing brain versus the part of us, our soul software, which is wired for connection. And so as I look back on this, there's two parts, right? There's the amygdala that's trying to do what's right and to protect, and then there's our soul software. And our soul software, it's really designed for connection. And so part of, I think, the cognitive dissonance that most of us feel is this fight between the right brain and the left brain, the heart and the part of us that desires and wants that connection. And so of all the things that was going to teach me, the experience of being empathetic, it was super glue.
That's a great story because it reminds me of, and I don't know, I don't want to make assumptions about your age, but I grew up on Oprah, and for thousands upon thousands of episodes and thousands upon thousands of conversations that she had with guests, when she's asked what she learned from her 20-year journey as a host of that show, she said, everybody wants to be seen and heard. And that's what your story evokes for me. And it's a reminder, yet again, that we all have the choice in our lives to turn up the volume of empathy, and it can make a huge difference to someone. And it turns out that it benefits us. It stayed with you too, right? The act of honoring his request, even if later on he realized, oops, he still felt really seen and heard by you. And it's a story that you continue to find meaningful, right?
And I think it's a really interesting lesson in friendship and love and leadership in all aspects of being human is when we're interacting with another human and we want something from them. Obviously, I had a crush on him. Um, and I thought that the best interaction would be to be right,
Mm.
because in that way I would have been taking care of him. And what I learned, and it was a visceral response, like logically, I could look back at this and go, yeah, of course, that makes sense to witness someone. But to go through that process, and I think probably as leaders or in relationships, we jump to giving an answer. You know, we're not really actively listening. We're jumping to the next sentence that we want to say to prove our point. And I think what's really struck me was this automatic knee-jerk reaction to have the right answer versus slowing down to really hear what someone said and to really witness their request, regardless of what logic says, regardless of what I personally think of the choice, and to be there for someone else.
And those
And
lessons apply for personal relationships within leadership and organizations, even when you're changing the world.
right. And I think part of what we see in the world today is polarization of opinions and thoughts and points of view. And I think that if we could we may not agree, we might be able to come to alignment. But until we actually begin to hear the other side, we just continue the polarization. And what both sides really want is to be seen and heard and acknowledged at a very primordial level. And if we can get beyond that need to be right, that need to be attached to what we think is so, or the right thing, or the good thing, um, and just slow down and be human and be empathetic to truly hear and see and acknowledge someone else's point of view. Um, and I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not, I think it becomes a practice. I think it becomes something that it's a skill. First, it's a mindset. right? Then it becomes a skill to slow down, to go fast. And then it becomes just part of a way of being. And so honestly, it's in the practice of being an empathetic human that I think we learn how to truly embody that. And for me, I think that the experience was to embody the practices. Like, you can write a book about it, you can write LinkedIn posts about it, you can talk about it, but faced with that moment where someone is asking for something and you don't agree, or you think it's really dumb, or you can see the consequences of what they're saying. How do we step aside? How do we remove our attachment to being right and just be with that person?
Amen to that. I'm going to reach out, invite everybody to pick up a copy of Empathy in Action, Dr. Natalie Petouhoff. It was such a great pleasure to spend this hour with you, and I want to thank you for the work that you're doing. I want to thank everyone. Just before you go, and I might edit this out, who knows? For those who are curious, did the flirtation and crush
I got the result I wanted, which was also really fascinating, right? Because I had such a crush on him for such a long time, and we were kind of playing in the friend zone. And that's part of what led me to this revelation that I had been playing there, and it was kind of a safe place to play versus just vulnerability, right? And so if you start to look at the scale of vulnerability, and vulnerability requires that you're interested in connection, that you have the courage to be real and to desire the connection and to be loved and to be seen yourself as much as you want to give that to someone else. And I think that if we start to really peel back what we all want as humans, which is, the basic elements of to be loved, to be seen, to be connected, to be important, to make meaning of. When we start to really come from that place, it melts away all this other stuff, the stories, the problems, the issues, all the things that we have, as humans, have created. And at the end of the day, I think, it comes down to saying we're more alike and we're different. And if we can just acknowledge that, I really think the practice of empathy, it's a solution to everything.
Oh, yeah. Oh, sister, amen to that. And I just want to acknowledge that we started with high performance cultures that want to improve their bottom line. Then we went to Dharamsala and talked about, the kind of education of character and compassion building that's happening, with the Dalai Lama and his group. And now we're talking about like the hardcore need that we have to show love, be loved. Like, wow, we did it all. Thank you so much, Natalie. Thank you all for watching and listening. We'll see you next week at Purposeful Empathy.
Thank you so much for watching or listening to another episode of Purposeful Empathy, a show that is dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who understand that the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. Please now consider subscribing or buying a copy of Purposeful Empathy. Thanks again. Have a great day.